Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Albanian-Community Mental Health podcast. I'm Dr. Adila Neja, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today.
And I'm Dr. Ariela Gacco. In today's episode, we'll be talking with someone whose personal mental health journey has shaped both her life and her work, and actually inspired her work within our community.
Yes, we're joined by Dr. Sonila Sejdaras, a clinical psychologist in Chicago and the founder of Care for Albania. She has an inspiring story about her own experiences on how she became a psychologist and how she's been supporting the Albanian community.
We're very excited to have her today, and we'll also explore a bit the link between our culture and mental health and why it matters so much that we reach out for support. So, Dr. Sejdaras, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy that you're here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we can start off a little bit to know more about you. If you can share a bit about your background, for example, your upbringing, how your move to the United States was, and how those experiences have shaped your perspective on mental health.
Well, I want to start with I was part of the communism era, the first 10 years of my life. I think that those years have shaped any of us going through that experience in a country where you're completely isolated, when you don't know that the rest of the world exists. And most importantly, what I remember the most when it comes to the mental health piece and that time of my life is that there was a level of fear, even though my family was not sent to concentration camps or was not one of those families that were completely segregated and because they said something wrong. As a kid, I remember paying attention to stories of other families and how they were mistreated because they said something wrong. So I'd always question it. Why would this happen? Why would someone, and I do have an actual example to just put things into context and for visualizing. We had a family next door to us that was two parents and three of their adult kids that they were sent to for the lack of better words, I want to say concentration camp, because it was kind of like an area where they would work only for eating a little bit of bread and salt. And so they were sent to this far area where they needed to work only because the father said the bikes of China were better than ours. Mm-hmm. And so you can only imagine, as a 6-year-old child, I was, taken back by just that idea. I mean, the fear. And of course, our culture did not really know much. Any culture did not know much about mental health or emotional intelligence, but didn't know much to protect their kids from talking like this, right? So I don't know how I heard it, but clearly it wasn't one of those protected conversations that my parents would have had or my grandparents. And so I heard it, and I remember it to this day, that you cannot say things or you're going to be sent away, you and your family. And then this family came back, and I must be around the same time where my grandmother would cook for them and would just tell me to, shh, don't say anything, because then we would get in trouble as a family, and she would just hiddenly just give them food. Now, of course, this experience shaped me who I am today. Part of it is the fear to live in with that trauma. We know that trauma is not what happens to us, is how we perceive a situation. And as a child, I was an empath. I think that a lot of us being in this field, we don't choose it just eeny, meeny, miny, mo. There is a reason behind it. There is a reason why we feel like we need to be providers and hold space for others. And I hope that most of us are not necessarily empaths, because that hurts us, but compassionate beings. So that was one of my experiences during the communism era.
You started a conversation about the communism period, and I'm wondering if we can talk a bit more about it, because I think it's something that just impacts so many Albanians. And oftentimes when I'm working with Albanian clients, we don't even see the communism era as a trauma. So, for example, we had a previous conversation with a psychologist from Kosovo, and in Kosovo, it's more accepted that the war that they went through is a traumatic event, but in Albania, we don't see what we've gone through as necessarily trauma. What would you say were some of the experiences that you went through during the communism era that have impacted you the most, would you say?
Well, I mean, the context that I gave with that, that's one example, right? But to live in a state of fear as a collective society, and as a kid, you know, we tend to undo what nature gives us of being authentic and transparent. And, you know, by nature, I've kind of like tried to undo in my adult life on hiding and not telling truth and shame and guilt. During that time, and I absolutely agree with you, we need to talk more about it. Even if you were 1 year old or if you're a post-communism, right, with parents during communism. I happened to be my first 10 years of my life, but my parents were all their lives during that era. So I was raised by parents that vibrated of anxiety and trauma and did not know that it was part of a collective trauma. A few main points: the guilt and shame, right? You can't say anything wrong or you're at fault. The mind screwing with like the idea of being paranoid. I see a lot of people nowadays that are paranoid, and you know, you tend to think, oh, well, you came here and all of a sudden it happened. I think it happened because you have a setting that can get re-triggered, but a lot of that paranoia comes from communism. We were afraid, even the ones that were not sent to concentration camps. We were afraid all the time what to say, how to say it, and then sometimes it was just random people that would spy on one another because that was also promoted. And another piece that's very important. So if we think about our field, mind, body, spirit, right? So our mind, our cognitive thinking was absolutely directly affected by the trauma. And then our body, being in our bodies and listening to that is a step further, which absolutely we did not have. I think that it was good for kids to be outside and play and be more mindful of that and forget what happened. But eventually we'd get older or we'd be raised by parents that were really anxious during that time, and we'd pick up on that energy. Or we'd pick up on parents that were focused on education. Of course, I come from Korcha. Korcha is known to be good at cleaning and cooking. And in my mind, I'm like, what did you need to cover that you needed to be so clean? Because, you know, we know that what happens is, or in order for us to be perfect, is you are out of control in certain areas and you want to be in control in those areas that you have control over, such as cleaning or cooking. And then spirit. I think that for 50 years, our country went without a religion. And even though I'm not a religious person, I am a spiritual person. And I was raised with a grandmother that even though we were not allowed to believe, she still cooked halva, you know, at certain... I don't identify as Muslim or Christian, but I do identify myself as a spiritual person, which I think that I found that later on in life. And so as a collective society, Albanians from Albania were not allowed to believe on anything. And so that could be good in a sense of where you don't find divisions through religions, but also this idea of who we are and where are we going, that gave us no map whatsoever. So not having a spiritual map, not having the tools to feel the feels, and then feeling cognitively misleaded by our own government, by our own people. Sometimes you'd have a brother and sister that you'd spy on one another. You know, so
No
you
wonder
have
we can trust.
Yeah, the trust is shattered. It will be shattered for a while. I think we need to lower our expectations and start healing ourselves the best way we can. But I named these three big areas because these three big areas are very important. for all of us. So of course you see a lot of, right now I see this education is key, right, for our culture. And yes, I believe it's important. It informed me who I am today. But education can also be only one area in our lives. And sometimes it can also cause us to not focus on the feelings or our bodies.
Yeah, we stay
Because
up here.
we stay up there, not in our hearts. And then, of course, our heart is directly correlated with the spirituality piece or religion, and feeling. And so I think these areas have been missed for a while. You see more educated people, which I love. It gives people opportunities to be doing what we're doing right now. We also need to talk about the other individuals that are educated and suffer in silence, such as us. I mean, I work primarily with higher functioning folks. Most folks know what's right from wrong, and yet we do them anyway because we're not allowing to feel, and we don't have that spiritual guidance. Again, I don't care if you believe in a tree or if you believe in a certain God, just believing is important.
Yeah.
I just want to continue with this religious piece for a second because I see it as kind of another form of silencing. I mean, it was an obvious form of silencing when religion was taken away, but silencing feeling or being authentic with how we were, experiencing a situation. For example, of course you could not trust your neighbor, sometimes you couldn't trust your own family members, but benefit one internal authentic benefit of having a religion or a faith is that you can trust in something that's private to you. Of course, there are organized religions and places that you can attend to practice, but ultimately, religion is a very individual thing that somebody experiences. So, with that being taken away as well, and fear instilled in that process, the lack of trust was universal. So, it was not just externally to you, it was not just within the self, but it was even in this metaphysical aspect outside of the self as well. And so it just is permeated so deep, I think, in our society that it's in ways that we're not even aware how far it goes. And it just to the point where I believe also becomes part of the personality. And it's so difficult to disentangle. And probably, we've had conversations before about the difficulty of finding appropriate care for Albanian clients. And I wonder how tangled it is, like all of these aspects of mistrust and shame, and fear around expressing themselves, that's keeping individuals from expressing freely how they feel.
So Nila, you were talking about the communism area and all the different ways in which have impacted us as a society, regardless of the generation. It reminded me, I don't know if you've read the book Free by Lea Ypi.
Yes.
It's a wonderful book, and one of the things that really stood out to me is this idea of being raised with one ideology and then all of a sudden overnight figuring out that it's somehow the wrong ideology, and just the trauma that comes from that. So not even being able to trust yourself, so let alone trusting others, but not even being able to trust ourselves and our own perceptions of the world as well because of this change. Everything we thought was true, everything we thought we believed in can literally change overnight.
Yeah, and I think that to add to it, the level of secrecy that we would have between one another, I even remember my mom would be like, don't tell her that I'm leaving because she's going to get upset as a kid, which we know what that will do in an individual or family level, right? But I think that the secrecy was promoted due to fear. And then to just have everything shift and not have a map and then just feel like, okay, of course I knew during the transition. I mean, I was 10 years old, but when I was 14, 15, I wanted to be a social worker. And I knew there were going to be a lot of social problems. Even as a teenager, when you change the transition, when you transition like that, there is no transitions that are easy. We all know, I don't know if about you, Adile, but I know for me and Arila, we've came here from another country, and I don't know if you were born here, so that's why.
No, I was 9 years old when I came to Canada as well. So I didn't grow up under communist era, but I grew up with what you described earlier about like the ramifications of our parents living in the communist era. So all of that mentality was instilled. I was like right after, the generation that was freshly affected by those who were living in it. So I understand very well what you mean. And then the immigration piece, another added layer
Another
of divisions,
transition.
another
Yeah.
transition, another way of like getting used to the environment around you and figuring it out, and
Without a map.
mistrust. Yeah, and a totally different society as well. Because I imagine, when Albania transitioned from the communist era, the society shifted. Like the feeling of being around other people shifted, right? And it probably was something that was very disorienting for many to understand how to live in kind of a new society. And I kind of reflect that back to, how my parents must have felt when they came to Canada, to be in totally another new society as well, culturally, new people, new language, individualist mentality, so many differences that could have been traumatic for them too.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, the first thing that popped up was grief, right? And Albanians don't do very well with grief, and I still have tried to figure it out why. And my hypothesis in 20 years in this field has been that grief is painful. Grief is so painful for all of us. And if you already have a history of trauma, and if you already cannot tolerate grief or come from a culture that grief is not talked about, then when someone dies or gets a diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis, then now you're having all the grief come to surface. And that's why we see, I grew up, again, I'm a little bit older than you, but I would see all women wearing black and then pulling their hair out and crying, which is another trauma, for a kid to see. But grief is something we don't talk enough in our culture. We tend to avoid it. And I think it's not just our culture. I still think it's a very important part of the trauma. From transitioning from communism to democracy, transitioning to a lot of people moving here, and then being comfortable with our deaths. So we can live. I mean, I am one of those individuals that avoided grief for the longest time because I lost my grandmother, which was technically like my mom growing up. But eventually I had to face it. And because I faced it, I'm so much better at living my life, not in that fear of like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. Oh, someone is sick, I don't want to talk about it. And then all of a sudden we just like get flooded by it, which is another layer of trauma, I think, in our culture.
And it goes back to the control piece, like feeling emotions, feeling grief. Like for a lot of us, we feel like we're out of control when we have that as an experience because all we've been taught is to stuff it down. So whenever it comes up, it feels like this overwhelming, very anxiety-provoking experience.
Well, it's not a feeling. It's actually, it is overwhelming. And I think that we need to, as much as we want to talk about how much people need to talk about their problems and where we come from, we also need to talk about how to talk in a safe way that you're not feeling flooded.
Yeah.
We're talking, it's three individuals here that we have been in our field, we promote this, and we feel more comfortable. But there are people that don't have a lot of skills or cushions on how to open up and then go back in the box. And I think that's extremely important to say that you have every right to not want to share too much. In fact, what guides me with clients, Albanians or not, but we know that everybody has trauma, the higher the trauma, the slower you want to go. It's not a race. It's not something, I don't know if you've heard the saying of slowing down to speed up. And I use that with anything in my area, but in particular with clients or even with myself. It's not something we need to just talk and share every single thing in a few sessions. And I think sometimes, it is a misconception. We want to slow this down. We want to take one thing at a time because it's very raw and important to address it. But also, most importantly, we want to educate, in particular, our community on how to deactivate the nervous system, because we're completely, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze is on all the time.
Yeah, and this is something that we touched on earlier when I was having a conversation with Arela about dysregulation and how rampant that is in many people. I mean, of course, we're talking about Albanians here, but this is just something that most individuals struggle with. But you can imagine that trauma adds another cover to our ability to regulate ourselves. And if it's grief, for example, as one of the examples that you mentioned, that it can come in so many forms that we're not willing to look at. It's just blanketing all of the emotional dysregulation that you have to kind of uncover layer by layer, but it's overwhelming. And I can understand, speaking for individuals who are too scared to unwrap all that they're feeling, it's definitely overwhelming to think about all the things that you could possibly express and feel more safety in not expressing and keeping it inside. But at the same time, like you said, we're here three professionals who have studied mental health from different perspectives, and we understand the dangers of keeping your emotions under wraps. But most individuals don't understand how that's impacting them on the daily life, and how those like hidden emotions that they're not free to express are driving the way that they're seeing the world and interacting with the world, and then also
Yeah.
interacting with themselves, and the feedback system that they're getting from this. And it's all becoming like a muddled, misunderstanding that they're not willing to open up. And I think this is why we're having these podcasts, is to encourage people to even just look at something, like a starting point of what they're experiencing, just to see where it could lead them, because it's not as scary as we have made it out to seem in our heads.
I mean, for all it's worth, for this meeting that we have today, or this session, is that it's important to validate our community that talking is extremely hard, due to fear of people are going to talk about it, due to paranoia of like, who else is going to know my business, due to shame, due to guilt. And I do think that it is extremely hard to make the first step. As someone that has done, actually is continuing to do her work, or the work is never really done, I know firsthand that it's extremely challenging to go and talk to someone that you don't know, and I encourage my kids to do that. What I'm mostly proud of is that the trauma of not talking about things and the trauma of guilt and shame ended with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm mostly proud of. And one of the reasons that I opened Care for Albania, which is the first 501c3 in US, is to lead by example and say, our parents didn't know any better. They have a lot of suffering. I honor if they don't want to talk. But what can we do moving forward? Because we know we cannot force anyone to talk about things. We know we cannot tell someone intellectually what they need to do. They need to feel it. That's why talks like this are important, because I can say all the right things as Dr. Sejdaras, but I want people to feel the authenticity of my words and why we're doing this work, so we can have a healthier Albanian American or Albanian Canadian or Albanian community. You can't be healthier physically if your emotions are not in check. And another piece that comes in this talk is that we have relationship trauma between one another. And when you have relationship trauma heals in relationships. So if we can be that safe place of people listening and planting the seed, and let's say that our kids listen to this and say, oh, well, I have parents that don't understand me. And they can get the help even by buying a self-help book in psychology, or like a 101 TikTok listening on how your nervous system gets deactivated. Our job is done. But it's not for us to push our community. It's for us to educate, to provide safety, to let them know that, your life could be easier if you either talk to someone, or if you do yoga, or if you do meditations, or if you go to a faith-based place and you feel safe, or if you create a circle that is your safe circle.
When I remember our first meeting together, and one of the things that really stood out to me that Ada and I are also thinking about incorporating in our own practice a bit more is just the how open you are when it comes to talking about your mental health experiences and how they've shaped your trajectory and becoming a clinical psychologist. Because I think the more openly we talk about these things, the more that we can reduce stigma. So I was wondering if you can speak a bit on how have your own mental health experiences shaped the work that you do at.
Yeah, and I think this is really important. I first want to mention that I had my first experience with mental health was back home. We had a few neighbors that were really sick. I don't know what the diagnosis would have been at that time, but as you probably know, I did my dissertation in the Albanian community, and the field of psychology is so new. We started having psychologists only in 2000. That was the first group of people that studied it, and it was behavioral based, the education, right? But I think growing up and noticing a few people that were sick and they were mistreated by their own people, they're stupid, they're crazy, they're this, or like, I'd walk, in Korcha, we had this mountain, Morava. So we would walk, and then when you come back, you would walk right by Azili. It was for kids, but kids that were sick, that were mentally ill and were put in there. And literally they were seen as like these animals in cages. There were cages on the windows. And so that was my vision, my visualizing of mental health. And those kids, I could not really do much, but I was always like curious, like, why are they put in that place? The ones that were sick in the neighborhood, I would go and talk to them. And I, hear my family or certain people say, don't talk to them, they're crazy. And so that was the first part where I was seen firsthand, and I just could not understand it. I was too young, or I just like it didn't make sense why someone that's sick is being seen as like bad. It's like someone that has a heart problem, and we would say, "Oh, that person has a heart problem, don't get near them." In fact, I just recently heard that someone that has cancer in Albania, sometimes they're saying they have cancer, they don't go near them, like it's contagious. This is the misinformation that we have, right? So we want to educate people. And then when it comes to mental illness, there is so much stigma even in US. And this country is not, it was never a war in our country. I mean, now we have kind of like an internal war, but,
Yeah.
it's not a communist government. It's not a transition to tie it all together. But of course, when I moved here by myself with, I remember $300 in my pockets, and just sent to, a family member that was very different from my parents. My parents, luckily, were progressive folks, and I had a lot more freedom growing up in Korcha. And of course, when I moved to US, I thought I would have all the freedom in the world because I came for all those opportunities. But my freedom got a lot smaller, believe it or not. So we also don't talk enough about the trauma of someone taking on a family or an individual from another country and how they treat them, or the individual expecting that family to treat them, So there are a lot of expectations, a lot of failing expectations, and a lot of trauma that happens even like that. Of course, the first year I got absolutely so depressed and so down that I don't know how I found the strength to go and look for a psychologist. Because at that time, I mean, I moved here 26 years ago. You didn't have, you had maps, but you didn't have an iPhone or searching things. And I didn't know anything about computers. But I did find on a book, a psychologist. And I went to her to speak that I was feeling depressed. And she didn't know one word of Albanian. Again, I didn't expect any. Now I know that I couldn't find an Albanian psychologist. So of course, that experience of feeling shame going there, not telling the family members that I was living with that I'm going to go there because they think I was crazy. I had the family that I stayed with made fun of me when I would just like binge it, or when I would feel down. And that's another level of shame that was very obvious. It wasn't covert, it was overt. And so that absolutely shaped my decision to become someone in the field that I don't ever want to judge of or even perceive as judging. And again, I'm going to repeat that, perceive as judging. we have to be very careful in our field or not.
What
And
do
why
you mean
I
by
decided.
that, perceive as judging?
Well, I mean, we have our own biases. I mean, the reason I said that I've been doing my work and not my work was done is that, we have built these narratives of how we should be or how others should be. You have someone that is cheating on their partner, there is judgment, even by the best of us. Okay? And so I have to check in with myself on what's for me to judge. And it should be zero judgmental room for things like that, even for someone killing another person. And I know that sounds really crazy, but I've worked in prison. I've seen people's stories, I've heard people's stories. So I think when you start noticing that every perception you've had, you're breaking those barriers down, then you realize that even if you don't want to judge and you want to create a non-judgmental environment, you're still judging. And so that's one area. And then perception of judging can be, I might not judge, but that person is going to perceive that I'm judging because they might be judging themselves. So now we're dealing with so many different layers, almost like a 4D situation, that we have to be very careful in terms of doing our own work and introspective work. And also, like sometimes my rule of thumb is if I notice that they're judging themselves and I'm not judging them, so our job is to not judge them. But if I notice that they're judging them and they might perceive that, I actually am pretty open in the room to just say, it seems to me, sorry, there is a little bug. I'm not just seeing things. But
No
I would just
judgment, even if you are.
exactly, absolutely. And you see, just right there, I judge myself. And so I'd have a conversation and be like, look, I'm noticing that you're feeling uncomfortable. And this is ABC, why I don't think that this is something that anybody should judge you, including yourself. And when we have such honest conversations where you're not saying, oh, I'm seeing that this client is judging themselves, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to try to break barriers without talking. It doesn't work like that. We just need to be upfront. So to me, what I'm mostly proud of is not being in this field, is being authentic with my people and not in the room in some of the most intimate conversations that I have, so we can go somewhere.
I really liked how you touched on this. It's kind of like two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways, like judgments and authenticity. Because if we feel like we're being judged, it's actually really hard to be authentic. And it's something that we in the Albanian community really struggle with. And there is a lot of overt shame. We do judge one another quite a bit. So no wonder it's so hard for us to show up as authentic. And when we don't show up as authentic, then it's a lot harder to make connections with other people and have the depth of the relationship that we need in order to have these experiences be healing. And I think that's what keeps people from seeking therapy as well, this fear of judgment. Or even when they come to therapy, they're scared of fully opening up because of that as well.
Yeah, and to bring it full circle, I think it goes back to, again, not trusting ourselves, putting a lot of shame and guilt of not being perfect. And I wouldn't go so far of we judge other people. It starts with us. We start judging ourselves in the first place without knowing, and then you go into judgment with others. I think that even the most educated person does it. And so if we don't have enough compassion for ourselves, we're not going to have compassion for other people. And sometimes that's being misguided because we tend to think we're being selfish when you have compassion for yourself.
Yeah. And the other point that you touched on, which I think is important, is that, meeting with a therapist that might not understand not only the language, but the cultural aspect. A lot of clients that I work with, I think when they finally come to therapy, they really appreciate that someone really understands the culture. Because I think it's really hard when you're trying to explain something and then you almost have to teach to the therapist what the culture is like so then they have the understanding, and then finally you can get the therapy that you need. And if we don't know how some of the cultural aspects have impacted us, then it's really hard to explain it, and then therapy doesn't have the depth that it actually needs.
Yeah, I think it's a gift that we have so many mental health providers from our culture now, or a mixed culture. It's such a gift. And I want to find an opportunity to thank both of you. And I've definitely thanked myself privately. I do. I think we do a great job. And I'm creating, I think, Rela, you signed up, but I'm creating this web of mental health providers, psychiatrists or psychologists or social workers that are Albanian Americans or Albanian Canadians or Albanian from London or Sweden. All this is just, it's amazing because even if you were not born there, you're still born within the culture. And so to know that is absolutely great for the generation to come, or for like individuals like our parents, but even other immigrants, that they want to be seeing someone that has more intersectionalities and layers. It's an absolute gift. And I'm noticing there were like 29 providers that I found that are in the field that are not in Albania, but are, mostly in Canada and US. And it's great that we're growing. It's great that we're growing within ourselves. We can educate, we can learn from one another, we can be humble on what we don't know, and then also provide services in the most authentic way to our community.
And I think it's also
Absolutely.
beyond providing services. Like you said, having trust in ourselves is like we become a beacon of light that then shines not just in the immediate environment, but our extended family. If you're in the diaspora, it shines beyond that as well, in addition to the professional work that we do in the clinic. So it's something that can be kind of catchy. Just as negativity can be something that you catch and pass on unknowingly throughout your day, so does positivity and understanding of mental health. And I've seen it in my own personal circles. When I entered the psychology field and I became more open about anything, really, I started to, the shame kind of started trickling off. I don't know how it happened, but it became so normalized in my mind that this is just how we just are. We experience these psychological difficulties, and the shame just didn't have any room there anymore. And so the way that I spoke to the people around me, I could visibly see that they were uncomfortable with how I was saying things and how directly I was naming, let's say anxiety. I was saying angst. I was saying the word that people don't usually use. And I saw that it was uncomfortable, but then afterwards, this change started to show up in a few years of people then reflecting it back and saying to me, moments that they felt anxiety and moments where they struggled with their mental health, even if in a small way, you could pick up on what they're really talking about and how much they actually struggled without them saying the full story. So it's very obvious, if you keep up with this work, how it affects the people around you and how they reflect that back to you as well. It's a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I do think that a few things with what you said. Once you name something, and we know this, there is a psychological process that it loses the effect of shame, right? So you first name it, if you are brave enough, because of course you're going to get some backslash. I mean, I'm here saying that I was depressed. I went to see someone, and again, I've done work with myself that even the whole world sees this video, I'll be like, okay, But once you name it, it loses that what feeds it, right? The shame and the guilt, what feeds shame and guilt. And then after you name it, you're opening the door to the other person to name those things as well, because we have so much more in common that we think we do.
Absolutely.
Just because we're not sharing it doesn't mean we don't have things in common. And then that circle starts getting bigger and bigger and healthier. But in terms of the negativity is contagious, the negativity is way more contagious because it enters our implicit memory. It enters our memory of fight, flight, freeze, which we all have, the primitive brain. So we should expect the negativity to enter us a lot faster. We should do a lot more work for the positivity. That's why sometimes people get demoralized or like, oh, but I've done so much work and nothing has changed. Yeah, that's because it's a lot harder. But, for people that continue to do their work and you see them as healthier and you see them as like an example of what you want your kids to be, when we share stories like this, it didn't come easy, but it gets you into a place of breaking the cycle of abuse, breaking the cycle of trauma, breaking the cycle of hiding and not sharing truth, and breaking that cycle for a healthier community later on is amazing.
Absolutely. That's very inspiring. And I can see this kind of spirit is very likely what gave you the motivation and the inspiration to start and continue Care for Albania. And just to bring it back, because, see how abstract we can get with these topics. We can go into so many different directions, which is such a nice thing to do because it's so real the way that we're speaking here. But I do want to highlight all the amazing work that you've done. I want to touch specifically on Care for Albania. So if you could tell us a little bit more about the mission that started Care for Albania and then the impact that it's had with all the different projects that you have done, and if you can share what kind of projects and how far reaching they have been.
Yeah, I mean, I am so proud of Care for Albania. I think that it started with an idea. In the words of Gandhi, in my school, when I went to graduate school for the doctorate, one of the big walls in my school said, "Be the change you want to be in the world." And I really was pointing at that when I took the picture. And I have that picture. I need to find that because in a subconscious, I knew that I wanted to help and be that change. I just never in a million years thought that I would be a psychologist and have a practice of my own and then open a nonprofit and help people. I didn't know that I would have the means. The means doesn't mean only financial, educational means, the bandwidth to give to a community of trauma and to a community that might bash on you and might question you. And I have been questioned, like, well, who gets this money? And I started with just leading by myself. It's not a good start, but I started by myself. I started supporting it financially because I didn't want to hear, where do you get the money and where does it go? I give the money for myself. I want to help. Well, why do you do it? Because I want to. And so when you start and you have the goal and you have a vision and nobody can really like shape that, I think it's so powerful because I didn't have to explain to anyone initially. And so I started earning trust in the community by knowing that I am helping by myself as an individual and my family. And you don't just give money, but I would go to Korcha and I would just help this orphanage center for years. And then Korcha is obviously my city, so we started there. But then I started realizing that, gosh, why am I just going back home? There are a lot of people here that might need the help. Mm-hmm. And so then we started organizing events and talks and increasing awareness about mental health in our community. So we just celebrated our 4th year of Care for Albania, and thank you. And I had invited people that were also not Albanian, and that I'm also really proud of, because now we don't have only our community that supports. We have Americans that support us. We have Jewish people that support us. We have people, Italians, So in that group, when we were celebrating, I was thanking people with different ethnicities showing up in my little Albanian country that's as small as Maryland, or the diaspora is still very small, and supporting us, right? So it shows that we're not that different from one another. So just go back to, it started with me, and then now I have a beautiful group of people that support us. 2 psychiatrists that are Albanian Americans, 1 psychologist that is Canadian American, and then myself. And we do such great work in the community to inspire the community to get the help they need, to support them. We do 1 project across the ocean, either in Korcha. This year we helped Shkodra from an orphanage in Shkodra with kids that don't have the means to get the support either from speech therapy, physical therapy, or just psychological services, we provide the funding for them, so then the center can actually help them. And then, of course, we want to spread. Next year, we're going to help Kosovo, and we want to go to Montenegro, Macedonia. All those are places that we want to be one. We want to actually lead by example. So even though Care for Albania is based in Chicago, we are helping anyone in Albania, which is one big project. We put $10,000 to $20,000 in those projects to help either a center of kids that don't have parents, or a center of elderly that are completely isolated, but anything that we can find, and the needs are really high. And then, of course, we do projects here in US, such as, the Cancer Walk, Hope on the Walk, where we talk about Albanians feel way more prone to talk about cancer than to talk about mental health. So, of course, we found a way in to support cancer patients. We know that you have a lot of psychological problems that comes with it: shock, depression, trauma, grief, someone dying in the family. So we do that as a project, and then, of course, we try to do the gala at the end of May, where we increase awareness of, we help the Albanian American community when it comes to mental health. There are so many things that we have done that I can touch on, but I can tell you a few things that I am mostly proud of. Giving food to people, to older folks that don't have anyone to help with chopping wood or don't have food to eat, is heart-wrenching and also really rewarding. Giving services to kids that cannot speak, and just by having 6 months to a year of a speech therapist and then they talk, it's amazing. Having kids on the spectrum and sending them to Tirana, the capital, to have a full-on intervention with their teeth because they can't sit at a regular dentist. And as we know, teeth are a necessity but are a luxury for people that don't have money. That was another project. And many other projects that are just so inspiring. We try not to focus on one because the needs are really high, even though the direction is on mental health. If you help someone eat, or if you help a family not struggle for their food, that is still mental health.
Sure.
Yeah, we think of mental health treatment as therapy, and therapy is really helpful. But if you don't have your basic needs met, that really is the first step towards improving your mental health. Like, your tummy needs to be full, you need to not be in physical pain, and then we can actually talk about the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we focus on those things.
Mhm.
Because if basic needs are not met, like you said, we can have someone sit in an office and be like, tell me how you feel about it. Well, I feel like crap. I don't have food to eat. And you can expect, it's like Maslow's hierarchy, right? So there is a luxury that we have. I mean, I feel very privileged right now, even though I come from, not a privileged background. Most of us don't. But I think we have, I find it's my calling, and I know this is going to sound cliche, but at this point, I don't have any other dreams other than leaving something behind that is good and inspires others to be good.
Yeah.
And I do think that we have it in us, and it comes from our ancestors, and it was hidden by layers of wars and fears and, all the things we talked about. But we have a goodness that I'm really proud of.
Yeah. So, Nila, this has been a very enlightening interview. I think even being a mental health professional in this field, just hearing you talk about these things are because of, I think, why we started in the first place, and some of the ways in which you phrase things, I think it have really solidified my understanding of how the past affects us as well. Before we wrap up for today, I want to spend a bit of time just talking about support, because so many Albanians struggle in silence and don't seek support. So, what would you say to someone who may be hesitant to seek therapy because of stigma or fear of judgment and tries to cope alone as a result?
Well, I mean, coping alone doesn't work for any of us.
Mhm.
I think that it's a normal thing to do when you're feeling really down and completely disconnected from people that know you. I do think that a few things, right? The first thing that I want to tell the community that might be listening to this is that if your circle is not healthy, if other people around you are not doing well, there is no need for you to share or get back information from those individuals because they haven't fixed themselves. They have issues with themselves. If your trust has been shattered by certain people, there is no need for you to share that. One of the reasons that we are in this field, and I see a growth in our community, Albanian American community, is because we know that it is a private space. I can't guarantee anyone that it will never be talked, but by law and ethically, you know, we could lose our license. I mean, we have a big duty to keep things privately. And it's a business, it's a service, you know. It's like going for bread, you're buying bread. If you go and talk to someone and you know that this is a safe place and you have to feel it, it's really important. So I think a lot of people have this misconception. Well, I can talk to my mom and I can talk to my sister. Well, what if they're dealing with the same thing and they give you advice that's not good for you, right? That's
Like,
one.
stuff it all down. Don't cry. Just move on
Yes,
with your day. Not good advice.
absolutely, exactly. And even if they say like, well, you should do this, it's not for someone telling you what to do. It's for someone guiding you to make the best decision for yourself. So if you want to grow, obviously this is the right space. If you have someone that you trust and they're actually not in the field, but they have never hurt you and you feel like you can talk, please do so by any means. I don't think therapy is be all. But if you're alone, know that there are so many people that feel that way. I just shared how I went to a therapist and was hiding from the family that took care of me because they were judging me. And I probably was judging myself, that I was going to go to someone. I just know that we heal through other people, through healthy environments. And then a therapeutic setting is a healthy environment. I've done it for 20 years. I support it. I send my kids, myself. I say that a good therapist needs a good therapist. It's extremely important for us to look through someone else's lens that we trust. The other piece is, it's important that we don't get over this, go to a therapist. It's important that we take care of ourselves like we take care of our physical needs. Albanians are great at, if one of our kids is sick, you are there for them. You take your day off. You're like, oh my gosh, there's a temperature. And I wish that mental health looked like physical illness. I wish that we can just like bleed from our head and then show that we're depressed, because that way we take better care of that. So I can just only give what I do with my kids. I give them mental health days. School is really hard. I think parents deal with a lot as well. And it starts with us. I want my kids to just take days off randomly. Not when they're feeling depressed or anxious or they cannot get out of the house, but when they're actually feeling good. And I say, take a day off. It's good for you to pause. So these are the things that I would suggest are really, really few. And if we could all start doing one or two things, we will be a healthier community, healthier individual, healthier parents, healthier partners, healthier kids, all of that.
Yes, absolutely, Sonila. Thank you. This has just been such a beautiful conversation. And I think the listeners of this episode will feel inspired and possibly also encouraged to seek therapy for themselves, or at least get to know themselves a little bit better in some aspect. And I think you have provided an environment here for people to grow in that regard. So thank you so much for your amazing words. It was wonderful to have you here, and I hope we have you again in another podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.